Good morning, everybody.
Hello.
It is June 25th, 2020, and we're up to episode 57, where we talk about fireworks.
Fireworks. I've got
And white fear and fireworks.
Yeah, I've got my defund the police shirt on. Very nice.
Nice. I tend to avoid wearing t-shirts with prints on them. I don't have any like that right now, but I feel like I need to up my game a little bit.
Yeah, I have a very good collection. T-shirt for every occasion.
The only time in my life I'd wear shirts with messaging was during my evangelical days.
Okay.
And in high school, I had a t-shirt that had a picture of a Bible and a newspaper, and literally had the entire text I'm about to quote was written on the front. It said, "Wake up, America. Bible prophecy continues to be fulfilled in our day."
Woo, nice.
That's the kind of Christian I was.
We're rocking it.
Yeah, so to introduce ourselves, as we do, I'm Mark Van Steenwyk. I'm the director for the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
I'm Daniel Wolpert. I direct the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing. And we're racking up the conspiracy theories because they're just so fun. So before the show, we were going through a list of ones that we'd already heard about, talked about, dealt with. So we had
some are sillier than others. Some of them are like, okay, let's listen to that.
I know.
So we had Robot Birds is our favorite.
Yeah, Robot Birds is our favorite. And by the way, Robot Birds is going mainstream because I just saw a nod to the robot bird theory in a CBS show.
We're early adopters.
There was a robot pigeon out on the balcony. It was pretty hilarious.
So there's that one. There's all the Antifa invasion stuff, which is kind of funny if it weren't involving white men in rural America with weaponry.
All the coronavirus ones.
Yep.
Right? Made in the lab, 5G. The Robot Birds is kind of wrapped into all
Gets wrapped in. All the George Soros stuff. The Bill Gates vaccination stuff.
Conspiracy Gates stuff. Right. I'm blanking on his name. The Tom Hanks pedophile theory. Yeah, that was a big one. He didn't really have coronavirus. He just had to pretend to do it. Otherwise, they were going to expose this giant pedophile ring.
Is that tied in with Hillary Clinton's pedophile ring?
No, I think it's a competing pedophile ring.
I mean, you might as well slap those two conspiracy theories together to save space.
There we go. We'll start a brand new one. And then coming up a close second to Robot Birds is the giant herd of raccoons you can see from space.
Yeah, that's the one that Ellen Morey shared with us, and so
that's coming towards us.
I welcome our furry overlords.
I know. I can't wait. They must have slowed down somewhere though, because they're not here yet.
And so this latest conspiracy theory, which I have more respect for because how it started. So basically, son of Baldwin, which this is, I think, how it sparked public consciousness. I don't think it started with him, but he has a Twitter feed, and he shared something that was. I posted something that was shared by Pulitzer Prize winner and New York Times Magazine national correspondent. So serious journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones tweeted, "Read this," and then shared this viral thread from Son of Baldwin, which posited that large amounts of fireworks going off late at night in certain cities are, quote, part of a coordinated attack on Black and brown communities by government forces. That the government and the mainstream media are being coy or pretending to be clueless about this, but that this is, in a way, psychological warfare against Black and brown communities. Right. And so there's been all kinds of psychological warfare against Black and brown communities. It's not outside of the realm of possibility, in my perspective, but it's still a conspiracy theory because you can't really disprove it or prove it yet.
Right. Well, and the interesting thing for me, and I had not heard about this until you brought it up yesterday,
I'm always looking for
and
conspiracy theories for
I
you.
know a good conspiracy theory. So living 2 blocks from the George Floyd murder site, we have had fireworks going off almost every night. But the thing is, you can walk down to the corner and watch people setting them off. So it's really not like it's some great mystery. I mean, the article that I read sort of sounded like people would just say vaguely, "Ooh, this seems like this kind of firework or that kind of firework," but we can't really see who's setting it off. Um, but you actually can in this particular case. Now, I obviously can't speak to what's happening in every city in America, um, but what's always interesting to me about conspiracy theories, right, is that, and we've talked about this before, is that they do either start from or contain sort of this kernel of truth, which is basically that in this case, that the police are not on the side of communities of color, right? that they are not there to serve and protect the communities of color. They are there to control and intimidate the communities of color. And so the idea that they're interspersing loud booms at night with potential gunfire, of which we also have had a lot of. So we've had gunfire almost every night the last month, right near my house. In a lot of ways is sort of totally believable. Yeah.
Yeah, here's a comment from Darren. Part of this issue is that access to the fireworks seems unprecedented. I'm going to share my perspective. I don't know if it's right or not, but I've heard enough people say this in the articles I read, and it seems plausible to me that we could have a combination of effects that are all very plausible. Like one, I remember that hearing gunshots and fireworks a lot in previous years, but we've all been a little bit traumatized. And so we have heightened alert. We have a heightened awareness of this. So one example of this with specifically gunshots, and part of the reason I think this is, I want to talk about the gunshot / fireworks sound later, but part of this is suddenly now in my neighborhood, we're trying to avoid calling the cops and organize a little bit. And every time any gun goes off, like all my text groups freak out as though this is like some sort of bizarre occurrence. I'm like, no, I've been hearing gunshots since I've lived here, and it always accelerates when it gets warm, just like fireworks. And then you always play this guessing game, like, was that a gun or a firework? Add that to the cooped up effect of people being in a pandemic, and to me, it just seems like, okay, we have heightened awareness. People have a higher need to blow off steam. It's just this is what happens.
Yeah, and the access thing, again, I don't know about other parts of the country, but one of the things that I noticed when I moved to the upper Midwest, having come here from other parts of the country, is that actually here in the upper Midwest, you have access to any kind of fireworks. I mean, so here, the access thing is not an issue. I mean, you can buy every kind of firework, and in fact, it's in Minneapolis. I'm surprised we haven't had more fires here, because in Minneapolis on the 4th of July, often I go down to the Stone Arch Bridge at the river to watch the big commercial ones. And I'll bike. Deborah and I'll bike. And when I'm biking back home, I mean, it's like biking through a war zone. I mean, the amount of smoke and fireworks and stuff going off is crazy. And like I said, I'm really surprised that more buildings haven't been lit on fire. So maybe in some parts of the country where I do know it's harder to get fireworks, that could be a part of this theory. But here, it's amazing what you can buy in your local, Happy Jerry's fireworks store.
Kathleen writes, I live in a neighborhood where we hear fireworks and gunshots a lot. I'm never sure what I'm hearing. It is disturbing. This is like to me, the effect of this exists whether there's intention or not, whether or not the police or the government is intentionally setting off fireworks. In some ways, is irrelevant because I'm seeing the effects. You have more scared white people,
right?
Because you have heightened white people who now are afraid they can't tell the difference. Like, and sometimes I don't care. Like, I always have those friends who are like, that sounds like a 30-06 or whatever. Like they just somehow know by the gunshot. I'm like, bullshit. You don't always know. It's sometimes hard to tell, and it's okay to admit that. But even if most people can anyways. So you hear the sounds, you're aware of the fact that our city is trying to basically abolish the police. And so like, can we really abolish the police? There's a bunch of gunshots going off or fireworks. I don't know. And so psychologically that adds to the fear, the white fear. And then if you add to that, the fact that the police seem to be willingly, here's the conspiracy theory that I think is absolutely true. The police are dragging their feet in cities where they don't feel as welcomed anymore, boo-hoo, or specifically in wards where they have council members who are less supportive of them. So they're dragging their feet, white people are afraid, they're hearing gunshot sounds, and it just all feeds into this narrative that we really need the police to stop the coming race war.
Exactly. And and the one part of the conspiracy theory that makes no sense, right, and that sort of flies in the face of what you were just talking about is that one aspect of the conspiracy theory that I read was that the fireworks going off were an excuse for the police to come into the neighborhood and harass people. But that's the opposite of what's happening. The police are actually not showing up. So that part of the approach isn't really working. What is interesting to me about the can you tell the fireworks and gunshot thing is that I'm noticing that my ability to distinguish has gotten a lot better because I'm hearing them every night, and there actually is a slight difference. Whereas before, I would not really have been able to tell very well.
Usually I try to tell based on the patterns, but that's getting harder when they're all going off at the same time. Like if I were going to murder someone, it'd be on the 4th of July, just so you know.
You'd set a firework off first.
Yeah, set a bunch of fireworks and then go, gap, 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 gap. Like, that's not
all right, Ellen's here.
Man. Ellen writes, with COVID, I mean, if the birds seem louder, of course, fireworks.
I don't even know what
what that means, but I'm glad you're bringing the birds back into this because that's the robot pigeon is our mascot of this show.
Hey, maybe the robot birds are setting off the fireworks.
Maybe they've got little guns in their bellies.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's move on.
Darren writes, I agree that there are multiple factors. 1, quieter cities due to a pandemic means noise feels louder. 2, because of canceled fireworks events, the prices have fallen. 3, police under scrutiny typically do less enforcement, like disrupting illegal displays. 4, people are bored and free to do fireworks more nights of the week. I think that's all true. Yeah. And I do think, even if there's no conspiracy, I'm pretty sure the police are shitty enough to exploit this for their benefit. So again, the intent doesn't necessarily matter if it ends up the same. Yes, showcase intent versus impact. I'm happy to help with that. Norman,
and what?
Helter Skelter.
Helter Skelter, right? Absolutely. Yes. Well, and and the whole thing about we obviously need the police because of all this gunfire and chaos. I mean, that is being pushed really, really hard.
It's pushed really hard.
And so it's being pushed really hard. And again, very few people are pointing out the obvious, which is 1, we still have the police and they haven't prevented any of these things, right? And most of the time they're not even showing up to help in the aftermath of a lot of these things. Mm-hmm. And so clearly having the police around isn't making much of a difference. so we're sort of, and again, I keep getting back to this issue of our imagination, right? The fact that we're looking at these social issues and problems, we're looking at this chaos, we're looking at this racism, we're looking at these systems and structures, and we literally cannot imagine any other way of organizing things other than let's hire more cops. And it's really, I mean, it's pretty interesting, actually.
Well, and so again, because I'm this next door warrior, like it's just such a fertile playground for trolling right wing people. I love it. But
You have a far stronger stomach than me.
it's just these are my
I cannot
neighbors, and
deal.
it says their name and where their neighborhood they live in. So these are people I could probably find which house they live in, and so that adds a certain level of like, okay, this of reality to it that I don't normally experience on Facebook. But what has been fascinating is during the midst of this, even on Nextdoor, it all went Black Lives Matter. All these white people were like either shutting up or saying, I care about Black lives. And so there was this burst of like, let's figure out alternatives to policing. That became the dominant stuff you'd hear, but it's gone back to normal, but worse. So yesterday, some lady posted, some scared person posted this video. They have a video camera surveying their alley. And so they posted a clip of this black man with a hoodie. You couldn't really see his face well, walking up to her garage door and clicking on it with what appeared to be a lighter. And so, of course, everyone started saying, well, this is one of those devices that scrambles and opens garage doors. So she called the police. I'm like, you called the police on a black man who you couldn't see his face with a hoodie based upon a suspicion he did something wrong. Haven't you learned anything? And that exploded this conversation thread with most people saying, she has a right to protect her property. I'm like, Jesus effing Christ. Pardon my language. This is what gets us started down all this. And so I'm seeing, like, not that this is a scientific sampling, but Nextdoor is totally shifted full right again. And so in a time like this, scared white people hearing fireworks is a recipe for disaster. Like that's my takeaway of this. It pissed me off. Darren writes, the race war is such a popular white imagination. White people are the only ones with the arms to attack everyone, including the US government. The issue is that they also imagine that black peoples and others are ready to launch an equal and opposite attack against them. Right. This ties right into white persecution complexes.
Yeah, well, and again, this is a really, really important thing in terms of our historical ignorance. And, that book that I've mentioned a few times, this nonviolent stuff will get you killed. I mean, the white lack of understanding of the way in the 20th century up until like the 1940s, the late 1940s, right? This is not ancient history. This isn't 1760 or something. The number of times that white mobs backed by the National Guard descended upon black neighborhoods and burned them to the ground, killed dozens of people, imprisoned dozens of people. I mean, this happened on a regular basis throughout the first 5 decades of the 1900s. And so again, it's this projection of our own both fears and our own evil, right? And I saw a fascinating example of this when I was up in Crookston, when I lived up there. So the Red Lake Indian Reservation is right up in northern Minnesota there, and the Red Lake School District was part of our athletic school conference. And so when my son was playing basketball, we sometimes would go up there for away games. And one of the things that drove me nuts about people in Crookston is that they would never want to carpool. Everybody had to drive their own vehicle to everything. Right. So even when all of these parents were going to these away basketball games, nobody would carpool. And after a couple of years, I just gave up asking people because they'd always say no and make some passive aggressive excuse and whatever.
As Minnesotans tend to do.
As Minnesotans tend to do. The one time that everybody wanted to carpool was when we went up to Red Lake because they were afraid of the natives And I said, I actually said to them, I'm like, okay, so look, when a bunch of white people roll into a native town, like, who's the scary one? And of course, they all kind of looked at me with these blank expressions on their faces. But this is another perfect example of, this projection of and denial of who's doing the violence here.
White violence is hidden in
Yeah,
our imagination. Yeah.
yeah.
Now, I grew up by White Earth Reservation. It was the same thing. Like all this fear of like violence from the reservation bleeding into our towns, which is ridiculous because I knew back in the day there was this gang in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, called the Yamaha Boys, which just sounds like a bad S.E. Hinton novel. But they would routinely these dudes would roll into the White Earth and beat up Native American youth. And so that wasn't happening in reverse. So I think there is this, we're talking about, I think there's also this guilt, like that somehow deep in our memory, we realize that revenge is warranted.
Well, of course. I mean, there's this constant fear of that because we know that, again, if the tables were turned, I mean, we understand the desire to defend yourself and to fight back. Yeah, but it really, the notion that that we as white people have to be afraid is ridiculous because we're the ones that are promoting all of the violence. Kathleen, I think's got another comment here.
The rumor here is that the police won't show up until they are certain the shootings have stopped. We had something like that with Uptown. The police were there and they didn't respond, and there was a shooting, and because we know who the police are really there to protect. It's not, it's white people, but even it's particularly affluent white people in businesses.
Yeah. And, and again, what, excuse me, one of the things this continually reveals to me is our attachment to property. I mean, I really think that this is something, and again, if we, we've talked about issues of capitalism, we've talked about issues of how all of these things with the pandemic and everything are interconnected, right? I mean, one of the core principles of capitalism is the ability to abstract and manipulate property.
That's right.
The ability to have shares in a company, the ability to own land, the ability to create and then protect property, whether that's, buildings, personal property, machinery, whatever. And everything gets focused around that because property becomes the basic requirement to make profit. And so property is people, right? I mean, that's what slavery, chattel slavery is. People can be property, land can be property, houses, and everything. And we are formed in this, and we so much have this as this core idea that property, protection of property, maintenance of property is the most important thing.
To me, it's the single biggest dominant myth in American society, even more than racism, like, which people can argue about that all they want, but I think it's because racism is an extension of ownership logic to me.
Yeah.
And it's so bizarre how people don't question this. It's such an abstraction that doesn't make any freaking sense. Like, people will point to like, well, it exists in nature. Dogs protect their territory. I'm like, that's not the same. Property rights. Nobody's saying that you should enter in your space and like take from your plate while you're eating chicken. Like, it's not. Boundaries is not the same as property. Like, the fact that we don't even understand that shows how ingrained it is, and it's the justification. So this lady thinking it's justifiable because some black man with a hoodie made her feel nervous, that she's justified in calling violence, which is anytime you call the police on someone, you're calling someone who is there to use violence in. You're sicking a guard dog on someone.
And so again, I mean, the fact that the King of Spain and the King of Portugal can sit down together in the 15th century and divide the world in half, and say, you get this side of the world, you get this side of the world to, conquer and exploit, right? I mean, we have to think about the incredible, I mean, this is this delusional, narcissistic, evil. I mean, it's really evil way of thinking about our creation and our relationship to the rest of creation. And it's just something that, again, it's so natural to us. We don't even think twice to question it. And then it leads to all these other reflexive behaviors that, result in, right, Black lives not mattering because, my garage is more important than this person's life. And if you infringe upon my garage, I have a right to kill you. And there is something deeply problematic about that.
I think we should do in the future an episode about private property as a construct and how it's, I mean, you're talking about the doctrine of discovery, which of course is tied up in Christian supremacy. The doctrine of discovery, slicing up land, being the basis for American understanding of land rights, and then justification. There's a lot there. And I think people, when you hear this, they get confused because they're like, people will ask, like, does that mean someone can come and use my toothbrush? Like, they'll ask these sorts of questions. It's like,
well, it's kind of like defunding the police. Well, it's like defunding the police. Again, this is so entrenched in our view of reality that we assume that it is reality, and there is no imagination beyond that, right? And I got a few more comments popping up here.
Well, I'll go with Kathleen's first. The property idea may explain our need for statues. I'd like to hear more about that. I do think part of the thing is that people are offended that who gave you, when AIM, the American Indian movement folks, tore down the Columbus statue, I saw a lot of hand-wringing white liberals saying, like, who gave them the right to do that? You need to do the policy. I'm like, if indigenous people cannot tear down a statue of Columbus in Dakota land, then who has more right than that? So this idea of property rights is skewed. It's not even like that we slice it up. It's we slice it up in a way that benefits some and does not benefit others. Sari's writes along this idea, even with property rights, we pick and choose whose property matters. I don't see cities care about housing and homes, centers, sacred grounds, etc. of marginalized folks. Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. Certain property matters more than other property in our society.
Yeah,
especially with the cops.
Yeah, and again, what's interesting about this whole business of the cops threatening not to show up, right, is that they know that that's kind of this trigger point for white people, right? It's like the scariest thing that can happen to a white person is that their publicly paid for gang is not going to come and help them protect their property. And so that's a very, very powerful political tool and weapon, and we see it being used all the time.
Gus writes, as has been mentioned before, we as white people have no memory of the times when white people have massacred black people who are just living and minding their own business. Wilmington Massacre, Battle of Canal Street, Tulsa, etc. Yeah, our collective memory, like we don't teach this. So this is where
don't teach it at all.
This is where it's so utter bullshit for people to talk about, like, you can't tear down statues. How will we remember erasing history? I'm like, those statues were an action of historic erasure. Those statues were the erasure of history.
No.
Yeah.
Well, and they were the creation of a particular version of history that supports a particular version of society. They're not history with a big capital H or in some objective way.
Serious. Right. We have mediocre products that don't work well and are ugly for us, yet ruling class indulgences and possessions ends up mattering more, even if it is useless and ugly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's definitely true. And, and again, this if we think about how much time and energy we spend on property and stuff, right? We probably are aware that storage units are one of the biggest growth industries in America. When people
Just spun off
move,
a bunch of television shows about people haggling over, bidding over abandoned storage lockers.
yeah. We think about when we move, how much time and effort and energy we spend on our property. I mean, this is something we put an unbelievable amount of energy into this. And so then we become incredibly attached to it, and then we want to protect it. And then we want to do that at the expense of other human beings. And so, a lot of what we're talking about here, and this relates to the COVID crisis and how we're dealing with that. Can we reorient ourselves around human beings rather than around stuff? And that is a big undertaking for us because we've been formed in a very, very different way.
That's right. We're past
All
time.
Right.
As always, this went fast, and we'll be back tomorrow. I think we have an idea about what we're talking about tomorrow, but I can't remember what it is. We'll announce it sometime between now and then.
So go buy some fireworks.
Yep.
All right. See you later.
See you.